Now, let's bring it back to the election campaign and what we're facing here. And as you know, one of the quite highly likely possible results, although they're all on the table at the moment in this federal election, is a hung parliament, a parliament where neither major party has a majority in its own right, and it's left to do deals with independents and minor parties and the like. So there's some fascinating new polling available on this. So I want to bring in Laura Thomas, who's Head of Communications at Compass Polling. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I want to first go to this question that you've put to your respondents in this regular polling you do. It's about a hung parliament, and you've asked people whether they think a hung parliament would actually be good for this country. And when we see the numbers here, the results are quite surprising and quite worrying. You've got 55% of people actually think it would be good for the country. Did it surprise you to get this result?
It absolutely did surprise us. At the same time, it was unsurprising in another way. And that's because we've obviously been hearing a lot about the fact that minor parties and independents are going to be voted for it, you know, in numbers that we may have never seen at another election. So surprising and unsurprising at the same time.
Yeah, I noticed when you drill
for the major parties.
Yeah, when you drill down into the numbers, I suppose unsurprisingly, it's LNP voters, coalition voters, who are most worried about a hung parliament. But of course, Greens voters and independent voters and even Labor voters are much more optimistic about a hung parliament, because I suppose they see that as a path to them forming government or having an influence in government.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, Adam Bandt has talked about that, hasn't he? Sort of calling Greens the shadow ministers. So it's sort of unsurprising, I guess, from their end. But even the fact that you've got 32% of people who vote for the coalition or affiliate themselves with the coalition saying that they would support a hung parliament, even that is fairly interesting. You know, that they would like to see their own party in the situation of having a hung parliament. And I mean, the last hung parliament wasn't that long ago, Chris. It's definitely still ripe in Australians' memories. You know, this was 2003, 2010 under the Gillard government, and it went very, very poorly. So the fact that people are still interested in seeing a hung parliament, I think, is fairly telling. And one of the questions we asked them in this poll was, what do you think is bad about a hung parliament? And what they said was that it's a recipe for inaction and chaos. So they know that a hung parliament actually can have really negative consequences for government, and especially in passing legislation. However, they're still looking to have a hung parliament. We asked them why they think it's a good thing, and therein you get your answer, Chris. They believe it's going to make government more accountable and will send a strong message to the major parties.
Man, short memories, short memories. The last time we had a hung parliament and minority government with Julia Gillard, that's why we got a carbon tax and all sorts of other dysfunction there. I want to go to another crucial question that you sampled here, because it relates to climate policy. And you just asked people to nominate what share of global greenhouse gas emissions they think Australia contributes. Now, viewers of this program would know absolutely it's just over 1%. It's 1.2% and reducing. But you find that most people, the average response is that we actually make up 10% of global emissions. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. That's, you know, almost 10 times the actual number. So there is a very big difference between perception and reality in regards to people's understanding around our global emissions. You know, obviously 10% was just the average. We had half of the respondents thinking it was higher than 10%. We even had 4% who thought it was as high as 25%. And when you think about the fact that China, when it was last measured in 2019, their global emissions are at 27%. I mean, the fact that we're being compared to, you know, a population of 1.4 billion, it's pretty astonishing. And honestly, Chris, it's a fair indictment on the education system, both tertiary and secondary.
It is.
And also on our media and our political class, because, and particularly for the people who are speaking publicly about climate change, this should be something that they're talking about consistently, because it's important for the Australian public to know this. It
is indeed. Thanks so much for joining us, Laura. That's fascinating stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Laura Thomas there from Compass Polling. I do think this is extraordinary, and it is a terrible indictment on our media and our political class. I always wonder, why are so many people involved in politics talking about climate policy as if it's the most important issue in this country, when we know, you and I know, that what Australia does can have no impact, because we can only have an impact on the 1% of greenhouse gas emissions that we actually produce in this country. Well, there's your answer. So much of the country is ignorant. They're force-fed propaganda from, I don't know, The Guardian, the Sydney Morning Herald, the ABC. They actually think that Australia is producing 10% and more of greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, we can affect the climate. We cannot. They are all kidding themselves.